Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome at the meeting of our committee. I will speak in Polish today, since I'm a Pole, so I use the opportunity to use my mother tongue language. Na początek proponuję przyjąć.
To begin with, I'd like to ask you to adopt the agenda for today. If nobody objects, we deem the agenda adopted. Item 2, Chair's announcements. Number 1, decisions of the coordinators of the 25th of January. They are included in the minutes that have been sent out. So you have all the minutes in your files. We need to approve the minutes of the 28th of June and the 1st of July last year. The minutes are available in the documents attached to this meeting. If you don't have any comments until the end of this meeting, the minutes will be deemed approved. Now we move on to voting time. We will vote on 2 documents. Number 1, amending Directive 2013-34 and 2004-109, as well as 2006-43 and Regulation 537 as regards corporate sustainability reporting. And the next file is guidelines for 2023 budget, section 3. The procedure requires me to check the quorum, so I'd like to check if at least 10 members of our committee are present. So if you could please press the raise hand button for that purpose. I can see we have a quorum, so I'd like to say that we will be using EP vote. We will be voting by roll call vote. The vote starts now and will end at 1500 hours. And the results will be distributed by email. And now we have a short break until 1400 hours because the hearing starts at 2 p.m. So we resume at 2 p.m.
Witam Państwa po przerwie. Jest godzina.
Welcome back. It's 2 p.m., so we are ready to start a very important hearing countering the anti-gender movement today to secure a gender equal Europe tomorrow. It is part of a large series of events as part of the conference on the future of Europe. It's a debate about the future shape of Europe, and this hearing is to contribute to that big debate on the future of Europe. Now, today we will be talking about anti-gender movements that are active across the world. We are witnessing a lot of mobilization in Latin America, in North America, in particular in the United States, but there are such anti-gender movements present more and more in the member states, including Poland, Hungary, but also in Germany, Austria, or France. Very often, these organizations are very professional NGOs or quasi-government organizations that raise the issues of sexual education, abortion rights, LGBTIQ plus rights, etc. These movements also deal with gender equality and gender equality in general as European values. Of course, these values are the values that we cherish, but these values are being undermined by the anti-gender movements. During the pandemic, a number of those anti-gender organizations have managed to restrict women's rights in Europe. For example, the de facto complete ban on abortion in Poland, and the European Parliament raised the issue on a number of occasions in its resolutions, and it presented a very clear position on the subject. We always stood behind the rights of women and the respect for human rights. So, given this active position of anti-gender movements, the European Commission is called upon to work on new instruments that would extend women's rights, but also would provide guarantees for the rights that women already possess. Because in some member states, those rights are being restricted. So we're talking about a catalogue of women's rights. There's also an idea to adopt an international convention to protect the rights of LGBTIQ plus people. So we would like to discuss the issue of anti-gender movements today, and we would like to understand how they work and how they affect the functioning of the European Union and this House. So now we move on to our speakers. I will introduce the speakers one by one before they speak. The first person to speak is Martina Avanza from the University of Lausanne. You have 7 minutes, and we're very pleased to have you here with us.
Thank you, Mr. President. So first of all, I would like to thank the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality for inviting me to speak about my work. It's an honor to be here. So I'm Italian, but I work at the University of Lausanne, but I will speak in English because as academics, this is our communication language. So I'm here to talk about my research on anti-gender and anti-abortion movements in Italy. Italy is an interesting case not only because women and LGBTIQ+ rights are fragile in my country, to say the least, but also because through the Italian case, I want to underline two aspects that are important also in other countries in the EU. First point. I started studying the anti-abortion movement in Italy in January 2013, and the anti-gender movement was not existent at the time. But after a few months, during the spring, the first anti-gender conferences were held. The anti-gender movement grew stronger from September 2013 in the context of the protest against the law on homophobia called Legge Scalfarotto, which, by the way, never passed because of these anti-gender mobilizations. So I was there at the beginning of the anti-gender movement, and that allowed me to see that the anti-abortion activists are the ones who initiated it. If there were suddenly anti-gender conferences and protests popping up everywhere in Italy, it's because the network of activists who organized them was already there. This is true even in other countries. For example, if we take France, there were huge mobilization against same-sex marriage called Manif pour tous. And that surprised a lot of observers in 2012, but those mobilizations were possible only because of the anti-abortion network behind it. So the first element that we can learn from my research is that behind the anti-gender protests targeting LGBTIQ+ people lie the anti-abortion activists targeting women. So this should show gender-critical feminists how misplaced they are. These feminists want to defend women as the feminist subject and feel that transgender people, and especially transgender women, are threatening this space. So they display a very critical discourse against gender identity that is not so different from the anti-gender discourse mobilized by conservative and pro-life activists. So I would really like to underline that we have a common enemy here. The enemy takes different names, anti-abortion, anti-gender, but it's the same people. And we, as feminist women and LGBTIQ+ people, we should stick together if we want to have a chance to counter this movement. Trans women are not threatening women's rights, but anti-gender and anti-abortion are. Therefore, we should avoid to fight the wrong battle. Second point, anti-gender and anti-abortion activists in Italy and elsewhere use different political strategies. In Italy, radical pro-life groups like Pro Vita Onlus are against all abortions, even when a woman has been raped. These radical groups use street protests, bloody images of aborted fetuses, and shocking campaigns. They are close to the far-right parties like the neo-fascists from Forza Nuova, but also the Lega Nord. They are linked to the more conservative group in the Catholic Church. On the other side of the spectrum, we have what I call respectable, in quotation marks, pro-life groups, like the Movimento per la Vita, Movement for Life, which is the oldest pro-life organization in Italy. The Movement for Life has close link with the Italian Church and the Pope. They have close link with the governmental center-right parties and institutions. They apply to and win calls from the Ministry of Health. They are invited as experts in several committees. In a word, they are considered as respectable partners with whom the institution can work. The Movement for Life is not officially abolitionist, meaning they don't want abortion to be illegal. They do not call women who have an abortion murderer, and they never use violent images of aborted fetuses. Does this mean that we should limit our fight to the radical pro-life because the respectable pro-life are compatible with democracy? I am not so sure. Obviously, radical pro-lifers are very dangerous when they access power. This was the case in Italy in 2018, when the Lega Nord brought some of these radical pro-lifers in the parliament and even in the government. This is also what happens in Poland or Hungary, so obviously radical pro-lifers can be very dangerous. But we are able to see them as the enemy, to condemn them and to fight them. This is more difficult with respectable pro-lifers. Their strategy is to play nice, to be able to use the institution for their purpose. In Italy, the Movement for Life says they respect the law 194 that legalized abortion in Italy, and that they just, quotation mark, want to defend the conscientious objector doctors. But the reality nowadays in Italy is that more than 70% of the gynecologists in public hospitals, and those are the only ones allowed to perform abortion, are conscientious objectors. In 22 hospitals today, 100% of the gynecologists are against abortion, so they refuse to perform it. In 72 hospitals, more than 80% are doctors who refuse to perform abortions. So the reality is that nowadays the Movement for Life is hurting women much more than the shocking bloody campaign of the radical pro-lifers. The EU is very important in the respectable pro-lifer strategy. Carlo Casini, who was the founder and the president for 25 years of the Movement for Life, was elected several times as a member of the European Parliament between 1984 and 2014. Between 1990 and 2016, he used EU funds to organize a school writing contest in Italy about the right to life. And the winners always went to Strasbourg with him, all expenses paid by the EU. He is also at the origin of One of Us, the first European citizen initiative that succeeded to collect at least 1 million signatures. The initiative concerned the embryo who is, according to Casini, one of us, and therefore need protection. The fact that the European Parliament, and it will be my last sentence, just elected an openly anti-abortion woman as its president is a sign for these respectable pro-lifers that the EU institutions are totally anti-abortion compatible. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie tante, signora Avanza.
Thank you very much, Ms. Avanza.
And now the floor goes to Shannon Russell, Senior Policy Officer at ILGA Europe. You have 7 minutes.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. I would like to begin just with a warm thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion. As Mr. Beardron said, I am a Senior Policy Officer at ILGA Europe, the European region of the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association. And I'll be specifically focusing in on how anti-LGBTI and even more specifically anti-trans actors and positions manifest within the anti-gender movement and their consequences. In recent years, we've seen a quite significant rise in anti-LGBTI and specifically anti-trans rhetoric entering into the mainstream public and political discourse. And I think that there are a few things that are important to understand about this, so I'd like to go through them with a bit of specificity. The first of them is that the focus on trans people is in itself a tactic. The trans population is small, relatively poor, politically vulnerable, and that allows for trans people and trans organizations to easily become a scapegoat. There's limited general public interest in whether trans people are adequately protected, are safe, etc. And so attacking this small group that is a group that can be difficult for people to identify with, it makes for an easy wedge issue.
Again, Mr. Russell, apologies for interrupting. We have issues with your sound. We have a buzzing noise in the background. I'm going to refresh your connection with approval of the chair. Is it fine? And then we try again with interpretation. Otherwise, we are not able to provide it. Thank you.
Okay.
Poczekamy chwilę na...
We'll wait a moment to refresh the connection, and we'll be back with Shannon Russell in a moment.
Mr. Russell, you can press on the speak button. Thank you.
Is that better? Can you hear me better?
No, Mr. Russell, apologies. It's the same. If you could press on the request that you received, it's okay. If you can try to speak again.
Yes.
Mr. Russell, if you can try to speak.
Yes. You hear me?
We can hear you. I'm looking for a sign from the team leader of the interpreters. Apologies, Mr. Russell. You are already speaking in English, so you can continue, of course, to give your intervention in English, but we are not able to provide interpretation. Apologies.
Would it be better for me to remove the microphone and try with the computer's audio?
You can try to, if you click OK, if you can speak now.
Can you hear me?
No, Mr. Russell, it's even worse. Apologies.
Okay.
You can speak with the audio of your headset, but we are not able to provide with the interpretation. Okay, thank you. Apologies for the interruption.
Apologies for that. I will pick up where I was, which is to say that how attacks on trans people manifest in different countries, in different contexts, is extremely context dependent, which is something that we know from extensive research already, some of which will be presented in this conversation today. That context dependence is a core component of the strategy of the anti-gender movement. They, in this way, work to make national anti-trans efforts appear to be grassroots efforts coming from concerned citizens in the local national context, though there's clear and growing evidence that there is international coordination as well as international movement of money to support these anti-trans engagements. The third piece is that it's important to see anti-trans efforts as a component of a much larger machine that isn't actually about trans people or the rights of trans people at all, but instead about the promotion of capitalism, the suppression of democracy, and the general curtailment of human rights. For example, should efforts to ensure that a third party be involved in legal gender recognition processes, for example, a medical provider or a judge, what that's doing is drawing a wedge into conversations about the right to individual autonomy. The core discussion isn't about legal gender recognition, but in fact about chipping away at autonomy as a right. And when we allow that right to be curtailed for a certain group, it becomes politically and socially much easier to curtail the same right for others. And so it's frequently said by trans activists that anti-trans efforts are indeed a canary in the coal mine, as it were, for anti-rights efforts in general. Fourthly, the active movement of disinformation includes active disinformation on trans issues, and this is supported by efforts by media outlets and media personalities to present a supposedly balanced point of view, meaning that they need to present both the voices of trans people, who in this case are rights holders, and anti-trans activists, who in this case are supporting violations of the human rights of those trans people, and to present those two voices as equal and valid. And that is inherently problematic because it does not take the power relationship of the rights holder versus the individual promoting human rights violations into account into the presentation of information. And finally, anti-trans and more broadly anti-LGBTI arguments frequently play on a low public understanding of how human rights work by asserting that individuals have rights to things such as the right to use a restroom that has only people with exactly the same body parts as you have. This is in fact not a right, but safety is a right. And statistically, what we find when talking about bathrooms is that trans people and non-binary people are by far the most exposed to violations of their right to safety in the context of bathrooms, irrespective of the body parts that they happen to have.
No worries, you have extra 1.5 minutes because we forgot to stop the clock, so go on. Sorry about that.
Okay, wonderful. I just have 3 quick closing points to make.
Go on.
The first of, with respect to what to do, the first of them is to acknowledge that I think that it's quite important that you've invited a trans and non-binary person onto this panel in the first place. It's unfortunately quite rare for us as trans and non-binary people to have a voice in political processes and to be seen as experts on topics that impact us. And so I think it's fantastic to be able to have this conversation with trans people in the room. The second piece is that we need to think about how gender equality measures are assessed. And I think this is the place where our own work on understanding the workings of anti-gender movements is particularly important because there is a good deal of insidious, bad faith argument being presented by anti-trans actors, and it's vital that policymakers and public figures are able to recognize and respond to bad faith arguments when they're presented as neutral or as potentially representing a different set of rights holders. And finally, there's a desperate need for non-trans people, for cis people, to take risks and join the fight to ensure that trans communities and trans peoples are protected. The community itself is small, and more than this, the community is exhausted because of the rather endless onslaught of anti-trans media and political coverage. And so it's vital that we ensure that we are all aware of that and able to engage the conversation constructively. Thanks very much.
Dziękuję bardzo za bardzo interesujące.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. And now our third speaker, Mr. Neil Data, Secretary of the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. Neil, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this very important hearing, and it's a pleasure for me to be back with the FEM committee. I'm Neil Datt. I'm the secretary of an organization called European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. We regroup members of parliament across geographic Europe in order to advance the rights to sexual and reproductive health. I'll be speaking today about countering the anti-gender movement in order to secure more gender equal Europe for tomorrow. This committee has heard me speak on 2 previous occasions in 2021, so I will skip a general presentation of anti-gender, which Keenan and Martina Avanza have done very well, and I'll go straight into my thoughts about what we can do to counter this movement. Next slide, please. So first, I would invite us to take stock of what we know about the anti-gender movement. Keenan from ILGA and Martina Avanza have already very well explained it. In short, we know who they are and how they are organized. We also know how they're funded. We know that they're most impactful when they're able to strike an ambush. So when people are unaware of them, that's when they are able to have the most success. We also know that they fear the light of day. They don't like public scrutiny about their leaders, associations with undemocratic actors, sources of funding, and overall agenda. And I'll get more into that a bit later. And also, I would say that since 2018, we have been successful in limiting their impact. So I would suggest that we take this as a starting point about what we know about the anti-gender movement, and then we can take a look at some very concrete things about what we can do to counter them. Next slide, please. So first, just as a reminder of what we know that they're transnationally organized. Okay, that's very important for us to be aware of, so that local initiatives such as the Croatian anti-equal marriage referendum, various initiatives in Poland or in Hungary or in Romania or France or Italy, those are not necessarily local initiatives. They're part of the local expressions of a transnational networking set of actors. Next slide. We also have a fairly decent idea of some of the funding behind this. So we released a report, which I presented last year, which shows that at the very minimum, there's at least $700 million that has gone into the anti-gender movement over the past 10 years between the years 2009 and 18, with three main geographic sources, the United States, Russia, and Europe itself being the main one, including money from the European Union. So we already know this. Next slide. So what can we do to protect human rights and European values? I would suggest that there's at least 5 areas that we can explore that can further cement our human rights protections. One is to discover and disrobe the anti-gender, disarm the anti-gender, dislocate them from decision-making spaces, look into demonetizing them, and then defending those who are the targets of anti-gender or actors. So I'll go into more detail into each one. Next slide, please. In terms of discover and disrobe, since 2017 and 18, there's been a wealth of research that has gone into the anti-gender movement. We heard from Martina Avanza an example of academic study into this area. There's been NGO reports, investigative media, academic research, even a documentary on French public television. The results of this has shown that the anti-gender actors don't like this public scrutiny. Some have even left the international area, so that there were a number of actors present in Brussels in 2018. Now they are gone or disbanded. But what's happened is that they've tended to retrench in national bastions in Warsaw, in Budapest, and in other places, whereas they've left Brussels. Next slide. Another thing that we can do is to attempt to disarm them. We know their strategies, we know their narratives, we can anticipate what they will do. What we can do with this information is raise awareness about what to expect when we try to make an advance forward in an area of human rights. This can take away the capacity of the anti-gender actors to strike in ambush. A very good example of that is if we compare the momentous work that the European Parliament did last year in adopting the Matich report, where their members of the European Parliament were prepared for the anti-gender onslaught that was going to come, compared to the lack of preparation in 2013, which led to the defeat of the Estrela report. So preparation can lead to disarming anti-gender. Next slide, please. Another one is to attempt to dislocate them from decision-making spaces. A common objective of anti-gender actors will be to seek recognition from international organizations, and this then provides them legitimacy. This is why their offices are located in Brussels, Vienna, Strasbourg, Geneva, and not in Paris, Berlin, or Madrid. They're there for the international decision-making bodies. What's been happening is that, on the one hand, they try to engage with international bodies while equally challenging the legitimacy of these very same international bodies. A very good one is a number of organizations submit amicus briefs to the European Court of Human Rights while simultaneously issuing a report using anti-Semitic tropes, questioning the legitimacy and the credibility of these same judges on the European Court of Human Rights. This has led a number of scholars to consider anti-gender actors as uncivil society, in that they don't necessarily share the same values of human rights, rule of law, and democracy, and with this realization, to wonder whether they should be granted access to these decision-making spaces. Already in 2018, the Council of Europe has decided to reject Alliance Defending Freedom International for participatory status, stating specifically because the organization does not adhere to the basic values of the Council of Europe. Next slide. Demonetize. So now we have an understanding of their funding basis and the several channels that provide funding to this. With this knowledge, we can start to organize. We can ask ourselves, why is public funding going to anti-gender actors? Why is public funding specifically from regional, local, state authorities, even the EU, going to activities which are designed to dissuade women from accessing their human rights? For example, the right to abortion as it exists in many countries. We also know that there's big corporate money and billionaires behind a number of anti-gender organizations and initiatives. We can look into accountability campaigns for these corporate donors and billionaires. Also, one thing is that we have an absence of transparency requirements for interaction with public bodies, specifically with regards to finances. That's something that we need to take a look at, and also better linking anti-gender finance transparency with efforts to take a look at anti-corruption and dark money. And then finally, there's also a large amount of money coming from illiberal governments, Poland and Hungary, towards these government-organized NGOs, which take on anti-gender positions that there we need to take a look at as well. Next slide. And then here, finally, defense. One common thing that we see, a common strategy that we see of anti-gender actors, once they are under the spotlight, once they feel challenged, is to hit back and to launch lawsuits against human rights defenders. This is very common in a number of different countries, among them Poland, by an organization called Ordo Juris. I should state myself, I'm the subject of several lawsuits for presentations I made in FEM committee-related meetings. And so we know that this is a tactic that they use, which serves several purposes. It serves to intimidate human rights actors. It serves as communications and fundraising material, and like this they're able to meet several objectives, whether their lawsuits are successful or not. So I'll end here. Thank you very much. Just to conclude on discover and disrobe, disarm, dislocate, demonetize, and defend. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope it's been useful to consider what we can do with the anti-gender actors.
Dziękuję bardzo. Oczywiście bardzo.
Thank you very much indeed. Extremely interesting. And the final speaker is Tatevik Hovansyan, Europe and Eurasia editor with Open Democracies Tracking the Backlash Project. You have 7 minutes.
Miss, you can press on the speak button, thank you. It's blue in this moment.
Can you hear and see me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Yeah,
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for having us here today. I'm an Armenian, but I'll speak English today. I present Open Democracy, which is an independent global media platform with a main office in London. Next slide, please. So I've always thought that Europe is the best part of the world in which to be a woman. And my assumption is not baseless. According to one of the latest surveys, European countries are among the best places for women to live, thanks to their high regard for human rights, gender equality, and safety. Given this, I was truly startled when last year our team of feminist investigative journalists discovered that in at least 8 European countries, women were provided with unproven, unethical treatment to reverse medical abortions. And these activities were pushed by US religious extremists. This is just one example among many showing how the old continent is failing to ensure people's sexual and reproductive health and rights. Next slide, please. We have started to investigate the organized anti-gender movement since 2017, and we have seen that for the last 15 years around the world, anti-democratic actors started to use their anti-democratic tactics to pursue their anti-democratic goals that would shut huge numbers of people out of human rights and equality and would reverse historic progress that has been made in recent decades. So, when we are talking about the transnational backlash against sexual and reproductive rights, we should remember that this is not something that is uncoordinated or an abstract phenomenon. As Neil Data mentioned, they are very organized. They have organized networks. They have big money, carefully planned strategies, ambitious goals to block or roll back human rights by influencing elections, courts, education and health system, policymakers, and the public. Next slide, please. So last year, we looked at the international spending of 28 US Christian rights groups that oppose sexual and reproductive rights and found that overall, Europe was remaining the region where the most money was spent. Furthermore, anti-gender funding in Europe has increased dramatically over the past decade. Between 2007 and 2019, US Christian rights organizations allocated more than 98 million to spend in the continent, mainly fueling campaigns against women and LGBT rights, sex education, and abortion. And this number is an underestimation because these organizations or some of these organizations do not register as NGOs, but as churches, and therefore they're under no obligation to disclose their financial data. Next slide, please. So on your screens, you can see some of the biggest US spenders in the region. Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, one of the biggest spenders, but it changed its registration from a nonprofit to a church in 2014 and has had not to close its foreign spending since then. The next most active group is the American Center for Law and Justice, Alliance Defending Freedom, which recorded its highest ever spending in Europe. Also in 2019, they have recorded spending in Eurasia for the first time. Also, Federalist Society, which is a secular and conservative legal group highly influential in US judiciary politics. Next slide, please. However, there is a little or zero transparency about how US groups use their money overseas, where this money comes from, and how much money goes to a specific country. Next slide, please. Anyways, we have followed some of this dark money around the world for many years and have revealed that key targets of this funding include European courts. European offices of ACLJ and ADF have intervened in dozens of European court cases against sexual and reproductive rights. When Poland's constitutional court voted to ban abortion in cases of fetal defects, ACLJ submitted arguments in favor of new restrictions. This is something that Neil Det was mentioning before. And ADF has intervened also in the European Court to defend Italy's ban on same-sex marriages and civil unions. Here are some other strategies. As I mentioned before, they have been targeting women with misinformation about their health and rights. They have been sending teams of lobbyists to Brussels to influence EU officials. They have been supporting campaigns against LGBT rights, funding a network of grassroots anti-abortion campaigns, and they have been hosting major events in Europe, attended by hundreds of far-right politicians and activists. Next slide, please. So far, it has been a huge secrecy around the origin of this dark money coming from the US. But last year, our team have managed to find out that there are at least two main sources of this money. The first one is National Christian Foundation, which is the single largest source of money for pro-life and anti-LGBT movements over the past 15 years. And the next one is Fidelity Charitable, which provided mainly small grants, but hundreds of small grants to US right-wing groups. Next slide, please. I'll not go into the details, so you can explore top-line data on U.S. Christian rights organization spending globally using the tool on our website. There are filters that you could use to find the data per region, per organization, per category, etc. Next slide, please. So what is next? I'm a journalist, I'm an investigative journalist, and it's not my job to make assumptions or have personal opinions. My work is based on facts. And based on these facts and our findings, I think that these organizations are not going to stop. Anti-gender movements have money, they have plan, they have determination. And as far as I understand, they are interested in long-term wins. They wanted to build global advantage in long-time horizon. Also, as Neil Data mentioned, there is a urgency for their financial transparency, because far-right organizations are part of a civil society, but they are not interested in strengthening human rights, but want to undermine them instead. They do not reveal information about their finances, and I don't think that they will do until they are forced to do. And who can do that? I think that the answer is in Europe. There are EU institutions, national governments. They could demand greater financial transparency of transnational actors. But will they take action, and will they prove that the old continent still has the highest regard for human rights, gender equality, and safety? I don't know. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much for this presentation. We have heard 4 extremely interesting presentations, and now we move on to the coordinators representing the individual political groups in the parliament. And to begin with, Ms. Elżbieta Łukacijewska, EPP, 2.5 minutes each person.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I'd like to thank the speakers. It is a sad day, not only today, and not only in the European Parliament. All of us who cherish equality and human rights, we are saddened to see that alternative organizations that want a different world are growing in strength. And they want to lock women up at home, and I have an impression that sometimes that weak men are afraid of strong women. Very often, people who don't tolerate some difference in themselves then fight differences in others. And it is also very sad that these movements are being supported by governments and extremist organizations. And the question is, why in the recent years the activity of anti-gender and anti-abortion movements are growing? For example, in Poland, I'm quite flabbergasted to see that this atmosphere is then creating all kinds of dramas, suicides and others. And very often people who say they cherish values never protect those values. For example, pro-life decent living conditions for people with disabilities. It's all about power and raising funds. And these people then feel important and powerful. In the last few years, the European Union has done a lot on the subject of gender equality, in particular in terms of legislation, that we are also contributing in that in our committee. And I hope that our strength, supported by all wise and open people, will counter those movements that speak about values but do not put them into practice. I'd like to thank you again for this hearing. I'd like to thank all the speakers. And let's do everything that we can so that especially young generations can take advantage of sexual education, because the chair interrupts. So we would like those new generations to be well informed. Thank you.
Bardzo serdecznie dziękuję.
Thank you very much. Now, before I give the floor to the next speaker, we have some technical problems to make sure that everybody can vote, and therefore I decided that we will extend the vote until 15:30. And now our next coordinator, Maria Neuchel, on behalf of SND, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank the speakers for the presentations. It was very sad words indeed. I'm very sad to hear some of this. These are 4 questions. Firstly, in the anti-gender movements, there are women who are participating. That's really a pity. And my interest would be, what about these women in these movements? What position do they play? Because very often they're almost a kind of protective shield. In other words, if women are involved in anti-abortion movements, well, that must be right for women. So, second point, we're always talking about these movements. However, do we actually know the reason for these movements? That sounds a little strange, my question. But is it purely hate against women, or it's a kind of restructuring of a governmental form, and this anti-gender movement is just a step in that direction? That would be interesting to know, because for me, at least personally, I'd have to learn more about this. And the third question, how are we going to answer this? Do you think gender budgeting and gender mainstreaming, in other words, using this in all political areas, do we think this is a possibility to confront parts of these movements? Fourth question, is it your opinion that establishing a minimum standard, for example, the right to have access to abortion services, that we would have to have some kind of minimum standards in, do you think fixating on those minimums would be, would make it not, if we said this was actually in the treaty, you can't do anything about this. And so these are my 4 questions. This is a topic that leaves me quite sad, because equality should always be connected to progress, and a step back in this area is a step back for the entire society.
Dankeschön, Maria. A teraz...
And now, next is Samaira Refela on behalf of Renew.
Very much, Chair. And thank you for, of course, the very interesting, good, and necessary presentations. It comes to no surprise to you that I'm extremely worried about this anti-gender movement raging around Europe and beyond. We know this ultra-conservative agenda does not discriminate in who it targets, women, transgender people, the queer community, and everybody else that does not fit in the category male and pale. The far-right, extreme-right agenda aligns perfectly with the conservative religious extremist agenda, and they have found each other in the shared ambition of removing fundamental human rights and halting progress. And in this committee and in this parliament, I have often pointed out that it is crucial that we map out the funding for these groups, so that we know that these groups enjoy the support from transnational associations and are funded through private foundations and wealthy benefactors that share the same despicable worldviews. In Poland, Ordo Juris, an ultra-Catholic organization and think tank, used the money that was donated for rosaries and religious iconography to fund campaign against abortion, organize anti-LGBTI plus demonstrations, and subsidize similar organizations outside of Europe. That's not a public secret. And we also know that they have managed to tap into public funding, EU funding. So we should be ashamed that the EU has let that happen. And it's outrageous that our funding mechanisms can be abused in this manner. So there are organizations misleading women about pregnancy in Hungary, funded by the EU. We let that happen on our watch. So can you imagine it is possible to use funding from the European Commission's Progress Fund to support anti-abortion campaigns, completely against our values? And it should not be possible. So I want to make it impossible for these illicit associations to spend our funding against our values and against women's integrity and their choice to choose for their own future and on their own body. My question to our experts here today is, what can we in the European Parliament do in terms of making use of our instruments to make sure that we monitor better and that we prevent such situations? And what should be the stick for misusing EU money? Because we can see now that it's not effective enough. So what kind of other consequences can we think of? Would you like to elaborate on that? Thank you.
Dank u wel. Teraz Zielony.
Now, on behalf of the Greens, Ms. Delbos Corfield is connected online.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you so much for this hearing. Thank you for the very, very good speakers. This is indeed an important issue, and we do touch upon it in various files and in various moments, but it's good to have one specific hearing focused on it, even more in the context of the conference on the future of European Union. To the speakers, I just wanted to say that we are aware and we are trying to flag this. It's not a new thing. My colleague Heidi Otola commissioned a few years ago a study showing how these organizations are interlinked, how they are financed and all of this. Since then, we managed with Evelyn Regner, who was the former chair of this commission, to put something on the agenda of the INGE commission, who works on interference and disinformation. Now with you, Mr. Bedron, we have this hearing. We have members of parliament in all of the groups, or nearly all of the groups, that are working on this and trying to flag this. It is clearly not sufficient, but I really a bit wonder what else can we do. So there I join my new colleague that has just spoken. What else can we do? There's a work to be done on the funds for sure, but where do you feel, you speakers, that there is a real problem. I mean, we know that in some member states, of course, governments are inclined to follow this agenda, this anti-gender agenda, but that's not the case in all member states. So it's not, where's the problem in the Commission, in the Council, in the Parliament? Where can we act? Because I do feel that we're trying to put this, when we were told by Mr. Data, inform yourself, disclose the information, put it on the out world. Yes, we are, but it's not sufficient. What else can be done? This is a bit my question now. And my second one would be, are there any links that have been made with the Conference on the Future of Europe? Have you had any contacts, one or the other? Is there something that is planned there? Because indeed, we should find a way to put it in that important moment of work on the future of Europe also. Thank you.
Thank you. A teraz oddam głos.
Next coordinator is Margarita de la Pisa-Carrión on behalf of ECR. 2.5 minutes.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much. Now, looking at the anti-gender movement, this is the title of this particular hearing. And what we have done is we've created a whole series of discriminatory comments in order to put labels on people. I am, under your criteria, considered to be anti-gender. Ought I disactivate myself? Ought I be eliminated? I don't think it seems to be very, very democratic in nature. Those who respect natural law are part of this society as well. We are pro-human dignity, pro-human beings, pro-human rights. Yes, we understand human beings as something that is material, but also something beyond that which is material. So I think indeed we deserve dignity as well. We deserve accept all as equal, and we want to be understood that human life is a gift on earth. This entire negative approach to our way of looking at things and negation of our particular approach and demonization as well of our approach is something totally unacceptable. And let me say that many of the particular theories that have been spouted out are totally unscientific in nature. Being a human being, a man or a woman, is something wonderful. It's beautiful. It is a man and woman who will give rise to a family. So to put ideologies above human nature is something totally unacceptable, and it is a way of curtailing human liberties as well. It is something which generates conflicts between human beings, and this particular hearing has been a display of all of that, actually. Human rights. You are the ones who are undermining human rights, who want to impose a way of thinking, not us. You do not respect right to free thought. The message is one of hopelessness, and you are suffocating that which is absolutely natural in human beings. I think you ought to look into your hearts and see what sort of society you are proposing with your ideologies and with the undermining of human nature with these ideologies. We call for respect in love, love without compromises, with difficult moments, but with moments of joy as well. Love for all individuals, all times, something which permeates all aspects of human life. Constitutions of different countries respect the baby when it is born, respect human life when it is conceived. Respect the rights of women, the right to life overall. The culture of helplessness, the culture of hopelessness as well, is something which leads to the rupture of human beings and negation of human life overall. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Chciałem tylko powiedzieć, że to
I'd like to say that this hearing is based on the official positions of the European Parliament, and that's why we have organized this hearing. Unfortunately, the representative of the left is not present with us. We still have a little bit of time, so I will give the floor 1 minute each to other speakers. The first one is Radka Maxova, representing S&D and vice chair of this committee.
Thank you very much for the floor, Robert.
Ms. Maxova, you can press on the speak button again. Thank you. Ms. Maxova, okay, we don't have audio. Can you try again? Could you try to speak?
Radka, wrócimy. We come back to you, Radka. I give you the floor later on. Then we go now to Irene Toleret from Renew. And then we come back to you, Radka.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and congratulations on your election. Chairman, colleagues, I would really like to thank the speakers for these very enlightening and necessary presentation. The European Parliament's position is that love is accepting others with their differences and not trying to damage their lives. You've exposed a reality which is quite alarming. We've got clear determination of anti-gender movements that want to change people's lives, and I think the Parliament's position is to let people live their own lives, and the diversity is what makes up our veritable wealth. And with this financing, they are attacking women's rights, LGBTI plus rights, and our democracies. So I think it is against our values of united in diversity. It's not being forced to choose one model thanks to outside financing and being subject to interference and piracy from outside. First, two questions. First of all, Madam Hamza, thanks to for your excellent presentation. In addition to the strategy of getting elected, we have the same attitude in France. What sort of other strategies do these movements have to try and push their ultra-conservative movements? How can we counter them? Mr. Datta, how can you explain this gap between public opinion, which is highly in favor of abortion, and yet we have this significant influence against this? Thank you.
I give the floor back to Radka Maxova. We try again.
Okay, I hope now it is.
Yes, we hear you, Radka, and we see you. Go on.
Okay, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, esteemed experts, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank you all for your joining this public hearing, which is very important. I am especially thankful for bringing the topic of countering the anti-gender movement in Europe, as in the Czech Republic we are facing a lot of it, especially in connection with the question of ratification of the Istanbul Convention or discussion around the equal marriage bill. Even though we have made great progress in some countries, we still have a long way to go. My biggest concern is the organized spread of disinformation in society. We are not speaking about an organic movement, but organized anti-gender conservative groups, especially from the United States, EU and the Russian Federation, and they are investing hundreds of millions of euros in the fight against equality. Their motivation is nothing smaller than the outbreak of culture wars leading to the establishment of the European Union and European democracy. Sadly, one of their main topics is fighting against an Istanbul Convention, which, as we know, could help a lot of our fight against gender-based violences that has unfortunately only increased during Corona. As Hilary Margolis from Human Rights Watch said, in many areas the convention has been misused to achieve various political goals. It is an attempt to demonize women's rights and LGBT plus people's rights, and I have to agree. It is clear that this movement is behind a number of laws and restrictions that result in a restriction on the right to abortion in Poland, blocking marriage for all, or even register a partnership in Slovakia, Slovenia, Romania, and Croatia. I believe we need to defend our view of the world even harder and cooperate on multi-levels to be able to stand against the poor millions.
Thank you, Radka. You must go to the end.
Okay.
Děkuji.
One more question, Robert, please.
Go on.
How would you best advise us to help the fight against anti-gender movement when it is so well funded and organized? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, from the Greens, Alice Kunke, 1 minute.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our guests. I'm so happy, as my colleagues, that you are here and provide us with this important information. And Mr. Datta, you informed us that there are things to do. There are tools that we can use to fight this anti-gender movement, because it really is a shame in so many ways, not at least that the EU taxpayers are funding this hate. So my question to our experts is, what is most acute for us as members of the European Parliament to do now? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I have from ECR, Michel Huheven. Tell me if I'm reading your name wrong.
Michiel Hogeveen. Thank you, Chair. And,
thank you, well.
Congratulations to your elections. As a participant of the Conference on the Future of Europe, I think I'm glad to take part in today's discussion, and I think the speakers gave some good insight in their field of research. Being Dutch, we believe that all gender should be free of discrimination, oppression and harm, and we support women's empowerment and the progress made by the LGBT community, particularly in the last decade. But as many of you know, I'm also a proud defender of member states' rights, and I'm not denying the influence of rival state actors in campaigns related to misinformation and hate speech surrounding the anti-gender movement. I would like to stress out that there are stark differences in cultures and traditions amongst our member states, as was also pointed out by Mr. Russell, I believe, in his presentation. If we look at our own parliament, for instance, we see that the Inge committees report disinformation campaigns about LGBTIQ+ people in the EU and foreign influence, claims that Central and Eastern European member states are caught between either defending LGBTIQ+ values while also defending a pro-family agenda. But in the Netherlands, these two values are the same. We don't make a distinction anymore. But obviously, family law and personal law is a competence of the member states. So we should keep in mind that we all have different cultures and different backgrounds in this discussion. Concludingly, I would like to wrap up by saying that I'm confident that the situation of anti-gender movement will be improved with more data and certain actors' online patterns and research on funding sources are known. On our end, developments of tools such as the anti-coercion instrument, currently in the first consultation stage at the Parliament, if done well, can be a positive legislative measure on the path to ensure the defense of human rights for all our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you well. And now Helen Fritzen from SND Group. Helen.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair, for the word, and I would also like to thank you to our guests for interesting and important contributions. I'm sure that the anti-gender movement affects us, and sometimes it is rather discreet disinformation campaigns. Sometimes it is through death threats. So it is to say very upsetting and very concerning for individuals, but also for the society as a whole. They are actively working to restrict human rights. So I think it is important with research is being done, but we are still lacking the full insight, and these movements are moving very fast. So from our perspective, and that will be my question, how can we ensure we move faster than these movements, and what needs to be done to more effectively raise awareness in order to countering these movements? So thank you so much, dear Chair.
Tack så mycket. And now I have honor to give the voice to our former chair of the committee, now the vice president of this house, Evelyn Regner, whom I congratulate for her new function. Evelyn, the floor is yours.
Dziękuję bardzo, dear chair. Looking very much forward to seeing you chairing all those committee meetings we'll have ahead of us, but first of all, on this very important hearing we have right now. I mean, it's a very serious issue. We are talking not about cultures. We are talking about fundamental rights. We are talking about defending democracy. And therefore, a big thank you to all the presentations that are eye-openers for us, for our political work we have to do. So those anti-gender movements, what they are doing is destroying democracy, against cohesion and against what Irene said, the principle of being united in diversity, so dividing the society. My two questions are a very precise and direct one to our first speaker. So I was really listening very carefully what you said about Mr. Cassini. I had the pleasure to be together with some other members in the former Code of Conduct Committee that was years ago installed in order to look on transparency. Then nothing can happen with the members. Everybody is really respecting transparency rules. And therefore my question is, do you have some proposals to strengthen our transparency register? Because this could be really something to deal better with this financing, taking EU money for projects that are finally against women and women's rights. And then one question, very general, so somehow what can we ensure? Do you have some more proposals? You said already a couple of them to strengthen SRHR rights, because the right to abortion is one every woman needs in order to really also fulfill her democratic rights. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin. And now, Maria Manuel Leitão Marques.
Obrigada, Presidente. Eu vou começar por falar inglês, depois farei em português, depois farei a minha pergunta em inglês, apenas para...
Well, I'll do my...
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say that we're not calling to question anyone's choices. We're not against the right to life of women who don't have a right to making a safe choice to have an abortion. This happens every day, even in Europe, as we've recently seen. That's democracy. The democracy is to respect differences. We're also against external interference in our democracy. So my questions now are for Mr. Datta.
Dimension of this movement. Can you develop a bit more on the role that social media plays in these movements? And to what extent are these groups coordinating online to, for example, target specific topics or personalities? And we can do something through our proposals we are discussing now in the Parliament, the Digital Service Act or political advertisement to tackle these kind of actions? In your opinion, what we can do better or more? Thank you very much.
Obrigado. And the last on my list is Fred Matich from SND Group. I think he's not present in the room. He's online. Okay, Fred, you have 1 minute.
Hvala Robert I hvala našim stručnjacima.
Thank you, Robert, and I would like to thank our experts for their presentations. I don't want to repeat what has already been said, but I'd like to stress that I was also targeted by anti-gender movements during the time I was drafting the resolution for the European Parliament. These movements are very well organized, financed, and they want to take women's rights and rights of other groups. I think that a lot of work is ahead of us, but I believe that this resolution has showed that we can counter these movements if we pool our resources and if we draw the line. But we are on the side of good in this story.
Fred, now we come back to our distinguished speakers. The first 2 minutes belong to Ms. Avanza. Avanti.
Thank you. Well, obviously, it's impossible to answer to all of the questions, so I'll have to pick some of them. We have talked a lot about, and you have asked a lot of questions about finances, and of course this is a very important topic, and my colleague I think are better equipped to talk about that than I am. But I would like to stress also the importance of the cultural answer and not only the financial ones. Those movements are really engaged. Somebody said that, I don't remember who, on the long-term fight for a cultural revolution that they wish. And so we should also occupy the cultural fight and not only the financial one. I think this is very important. What do I mean with cultural? What they do want to build is what they call a culture for life. So, for example, the movement for life in Italy, they're not to put, they're not for a law that says that abortion is illegal. What they do want is that abortion became morally impossible, became morally so condemned, and people won't do it. So this is their cultural fight, and this is also a place where I think the European Parliament has a very important role to play, to step in this cultural fight and define abortion as a human right and not as they do as something which creates trauma in women, something which is violent for women, because they are also reframing their language. They do talk less about the embryo nowadays. They do talk more about women, and they reframe their anti-abortion language in terms of pro-women. So no, we are not against women. We are protecting women from abortion because abortion is violence, because abortion created trauma, and so they are reframing culturally the discourse in that direction. And I think it is very important not only to track the money, to track the transparency register and all of these things, but also to take place in the cultural discourse and state that this is a human right and not just an issue of opinion, like someone in the room said. I don't have no more time, so I will have a lot of more things to say, but I think this was the most important one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I have Russell. They have 2 minutes.
Hi there, thanks very much. I hope you can hear me well. I'll briefly respond to a few of the points that were raised. Firstly, with respect to the discussion on funding, I think there is a clear call for stricter funding requirements that actively ensure that civil society receiving access to funds are not participating in anti-rights activities across the entirety of their actions, and not only focusing on the inclusion of specific activities within individual individual funding applications. So to make that quite clear, for example, an organization could be applying for a specific kind of European Union funding while at the same time working on a different topic, working against the human rights of Europeans. And that's a place where I think we may be able to pay a bit more scrutinous attention. With respect to the question raised about the role of social media and particularly the DSA, I'd first like to say that absolutely social media is a central component in the ability of dis and misinformation to be widely spread, and it also serves as a megaphone for actors who are part of a population minority but are saying things that are scandalous or might get more clicks, likes, or attention. And so there absolutely is a role for social media providers to engage in combating disinformation, as we've been talking about in the COVID-19 pandemic, but really across the board. And the final comment I'd like to make is about culture and tradition, which is to say that absolutely, culture and tradition are protected human rights, but there's a clear commitment in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and its interpretation in the international human rights law field that culture and tradition cannot be used to justify violations of individual human rights, and the rights to bodily autonomy and to freedom from discrimination are part of what cannot be violated on the basis solely of culture or tradition. And so we have a responsibility as an institution to ensure that we're protecting those rights and not being misled by arguments that on their surface seem to be accurate and based on fact, but in fact are a misrepresentation of the international human rights law framework. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And 2 minutes for Nail Data.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. In the short amount of time, I'll just touch upon a few of them. In order to understand the anti-gender movement, we have to understand the massive professionalization that the movement has gone through over the past 2 decades. So Martina Avanza explained this, how in 2013 it didn't exist in Italy and now it does. And some components of that professionalization include generational renewal, so that from the old anti-abortion, now we have a whole new generation of younger leaders. This is what explains why there are so many younger women. And in fact, some of the leaders of these organizations are young 30, 40-year-old women. Another aspect that I think we need to take a look at is how gender and anti-activism against gender can act as a symbolic glue, as a number of scholars have defined it, between many different actors in society that otherwise have nothing in common. Now, 3 main groups in society which are bound by this anti-gender symbolic glue are far-right actors, religious actors, and alt-right populist actors. A very good example of this comes from the United States with President Trump, Vice President Mike Pence, and Steve Bannon. President Trump was the populist who is not against abortion or things like this. The religious actor was Mike Pence, and the far right was Steve Bannon. These 3 should have nothing to do with each other, but they all found each other and they were able to access power in part by taking anti-gender positions. In relation to Alice Bakunke's question about what specifically we can do, I would suggest that we take a look at some of the rules of engagement for international institutions, such as the European Parliament and other bodies, which were based on a certain amount of naivete, where civil society was assumed to be rooted in human rights and democracy, and therefore okay. And now we have a whole generation of uncivil society, and the rules have not been adapted for this. And so this means that we should take a look at financial transparency regulations, the values of organizations, and to double check this with the record of these organizations. I mean, just think, we have at least 2 organizations which are submitting legal briefs to European courts, and there is 0 financial information in any European country. To get information on these organizations, you have to go all the way to the United States, as TATEF did. And then I'll conclude here with social media, the question from Madame Letao Marques. Social media plays a very important role. Part of the professionalization and generation renewal was that in the past decade, these organizations went straight to the most advanced types of social media organization. And with social media, there's at least 3 different rules that they use.
No, please, Neil.
Okay.
You run out of your time.
Okay, all right. I'll communicate privately to Madame Marquez. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, sorry. I will give the floor now exceptionally to representative of ID who just appeared and is asking for the floor. But that doesn't mean we continue the debate, to Simona Baldassare for 1 minute only, that she can have intervention in the name of ID, as I understand. Simona, the floor is yours. She's online. She's online. Don't look for her in the house. She's in her own house. Simona?
Onorevole Baldassarre può premere sul bottone speak, grazie mille.
Okay, she's not there. We continue then. The last on my distinguished guests list is Ms. Tatevi Hovhannisyan, whom I give 2 minutes for the answers. We can't hear you.
Miss, could you try to speak again? We couldn't hear you, thank you. Okay, we are going to refresh your connection. Apologies for the interruption.
Okay, we try again with Ms. Baldassare. Simona Baldassare.
Mi sente?
Sì, sì.
Mi sente?
Sì, lo sento.
Allora incomincio.
Avanti.
Onorevole Baldassarre, mi scusi se la interrompo, però non la vediamo e l'audio è di qualità molto bassa. Ok, ora
ecco.
La vediamo, che è già una buona cosa.
Proviamo se mi sentite.
Ok,
sì.
Okay.
La sentiamo e vediamo.
Grazie. Allora, gentili colleghi e relatori, l'audizione di questo pomeriggio ha dell'assurdo. A cominciare dagli oratori...
Onorevole Baldassarre, mi scusi di nuovo, però l'audio è veramente brutto, quindi non c'è possibile provvedere per l'interpretazione. Se potesse intervenire direttamente in inglese,
no, andiamo
per cortesia.
senza interpretazione perché non abbiamo il tempo. Allora, avanti, signora Baldassare, senza interpretazione perché non abbiamo il tempo. Adesso non sentiamo niente di lei. Mi dispiace, signora. No, non sentiamo, pochissimo. No, purtroppo non la sentiamo.
Ok.
Adesso.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Adesso la sentiamo.
Okay, dear colleagues, this afternoon hearing is honestly absurd. Starting with the speakers who, as was easily predictable, all tend to one side of the debate. Where is the confrontation and where is democracy? I was stunned by the words of Mrs. Avanza. She attacks the Lega party for having brought extremists to the government. These people were elected by the Italians. On Carlo Casini, a person of exemplary dignity, chosen by thousands of citizens in the Italian Parliament and then in the European Parliament, who recently died and left an important legacy in our country. Shame to speculate on his figure. Even the personal conviction of our President Roberta Metsola, who represents this entire institution, are being questioned. As President who the majority of this Commission elected, I remind Mrs. Avanza that the abortion and the issues related to sexual and reproductive rights are still an exclusive competence of the member states. Speakers have spoken about dismantling these movements, prohibiting and their, excuse me for my not better English, their access to leadership positions. Are we joking? Pro-life and pro-family movement.
Mi dispiace signora, ma il tempo è finito. Già 2 minuti.
Okay.
Grazie tante. Ma abbiamo sentito bene, grazie lei. Allora, serdecznie dziękuję wszystkim Państwu za udział.
Thank you very much indeed to all of you for participating in this hearing. As we all saw, it was very interesting and very rich. We'll try to get connected with Ms. Hovannisian, but if she's not connected, we won't be able to wait.
Sorry, we see you very well, but we can't hear you. No, we don't have time. Sorry. Thank you very much. Next time. Okay, dziękuję bardzo wszystkim osobom.
Thank you very much again. Very interesting analyses, and your reflections will be a very important contribution for the conference on Europe, on the future of Europe. Our debate is based on international documents, international law, reports, recommendations, and resolutions by the European Parliament. And this was the basis for this hearing. Next item is energy efficiency. Here we'll have a debate. We'll still have 15 minutes late, but we should be able to finish by then. So to begin with, I give the floor to the rapporteur, Ms. Kunke, who'll have 5 minutes, and then we'll have a debate.
Thank you so much, dear Chair and dear colleagues. In the Gender Equality Strategy, the European Commission committed to integrate gender mainstreaming and an intersectional approach in all EU climate initiatives, including the European Green New Deal and other climate-related initiatives. But the Green New Deal, as well as the initiatives under the Fit for 55 package, does not uphold this commitment. When analysing initiatives in the Fit for 55 package, a strong gender equality and intersectional perspective is missing. And the Commission's proposal for recasting the EU Directive on Energy Efficiency makes no exception. This is deeply worrying. We know that women, particularly single parents, low-income households, those experiencing intersectional discrimination and those above retirement age are more likely than men to live in energy poverty at some stage in their life. Yet, the Union fails to address the unequal and gendered effects of energy poverty. A fair and inclusive green transition is only possible if these effects are considered when designing policies, measures and actions, and we are obliged to do so in accordance with the treaties. It is my belief that the members of this committee should be a driving force pushing for this, reminding the Commission about the Union's core values. Social justice must go hand in hand with a fair and just transition. Climate justice begins with recognizing that key groups are differently affected by climate change. In short, My main focus in this report is to highlight the need to include a gender and intersectional perspective in the revision of the EED. The Commission's regular evaluation of the directive should take into account an assessment of the gender equality impact and its effects towards women in all their diversity and those experiencing intersecting forms of discrimination. The Commission has a key role in making sure that gender mainstreaming is applied by the Member States, and this should be done by developing specific guidelines in view of advancing towards a gender-equal energy transition. And all Member States should avoid or compensate for negative direct or indirect effects of the energy efficiency measures implemented on vulnerable groups. Supporting measures directed towards people at risk of energy poverty should be introduced. And to design fair policies, we need gender disaggregated data. This is key to map and alleviate energy poverty. And as always, representation matters because competence matters. Therefore, it is key to promote a higher degree of women participating in the energy sector, including the training programs for the qualification of energy auditors. I look forward to hearing your comments and working together with you on this file. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we go to the shadow rapporteurs from each of the political groups, and first from EPP, Maria da Gracia Carvalho. You have 2.5 minutes each.
Thank you, Chair. Energy efficiency is probably the dimension of our energy policy where lies the biggest potential to make sure that we reduce the carbon footprint. The whole energy transition should be based on solid principles and shall be inclusive and not leave behind anyone or any country or any region. I thank the rapporteur, Mrs. Kunk, for the initial work, and I will list some of the topics that I'm quite in favor. The rapporteur has underlined the need to take into account gender equality in measures and decisions, and I agree. We all know that the energy landscape is affected by gender gaps in terms of energy access, in terms of labor market, in the STEM, science, technology, and maths, engineering and maths, and energy-related education and decision-making. And we should do our best to close that gap. I also applaud the proposals to increase the attention on a fair and inclusive transition that shall also take into account the unequal effects of climate change on different groups of people. And the proposal of the rapporteur to replace the concept of vulnerable customers with low-income households, I'm afraid we need to discuss it more, as we may neglect other categories of persons, such as the middle income, that are suffering also a lot in the SMEs by the rising prices of electricity. I'm also happy with the stress in Amendment 22 and 34 to skills, and I also see in favor the reference to the need to collecting gender disaggregated data. We need more data in all the committees in this one, and we have recently submitted with other colleagues a pilot project exactly on that. So where I will table amendments and stress some of the points. I want to reinforce certain aspects of the role of women as change agents in the energy transition, such as professional decision makers, entrepreneurs, energy consumers. I will stress the role of women as entrepreneurs and business leaders in the area of energy and clean tech. Second, I will stress the opportunities deriving from education and well-designed training on areas of engineering, and in particular on the energy area. I'm myself a mechanical engineer in the area of energy, so we really need to have more women in this sector, and I will underline the changes to empower citizens, because this transition, the clean transition, will be done only if we have the women and the population in general, to empower people, and to empower people we need to start empowering women. Decentralization
Thank you
is very
very
important.
much.
Thank you very much, and I want also to thank Mrs. Weiss and that is rapporteur in ITRE, and all the shadows rapporteur. I look forward to work with the rapporteur and the shadows. Thank you.
That's so good. Thank you. And now I give the floor to Maria Neuschiel from SD. 2.5 minutes.
Ganz herzlichen Dank von meiner Seite. Erstmal ein großes Lob an.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank Alice, who brought up numerous different topics. Of course, the responsibility to involve gender mainstreaming, very important. Important to understand the reverberations that exist in the gender field as well, and the effect for women. And I simply wanted to make it very clear that there ought to be equal distribution. Now, as I heard from the speaker before me, women are frequently portrayed as in a deficit position. It's not women themselves. It's women, the money that they make, the salaries that they make, their position in society, their position in work. All of that, of course, results in a lower income overall. And in that sense, they are deficited, if you like. It is not they themselves that are at deficit, but they are the victims of deficit because of circumstances. So I simply wanted to point out this is very important. Once again, equal distribution. Energy efficiency with climate change is absolutely necessary, and we ought to not forget that women are particularly burdened by this situation. It's necessary to have the proper structures in place in order to get rid of imbalances that exist or inequalities, and to make sure that this inequality or that this burden isn't perpetuated on into the future, this burden for women, in other words. Women must be part of the decision-making process. They ought to be in those structures where the decisions are issued. Climate plans, climate issues, all ought to be discussed in a mixed environment where women play that particular role as far as making decisions. The role of women ought to not be underestimated in this process. And it ought to be women that are involved in the national strategy plans as well. So amendments until the 24th of February. Wonderful work has been done up until now. I'd like to thank Alice for the excellent concerted effort. Thank you.
Na tym wyczerpaliśmy listę.
That is the end of our shadows list. One person asks for the floor. Mrs. Weiss, on behalf of EPP, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. Being a carpenter's daughter, it's always a pleasure for me to talk about energy efficiency. And also being the ITRA shadow rapporteur on this revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive only adds to that sense of thrill on this topic. And also as being the rapporteur of this committee's report on how to have more women to be entrepreneurs in the EU. That is actually creating some kind of a triangle for, I hope, some very good and solid amendments also to this opinion in FAM committee, really stressing the need for greater women-focused promotion of STEM projects, also that women in STEM can lead to more women entrepreneurs who can take part in the development of new energy efficient solutions for tomorrow, or business models to lower Europe's energy consumptions. It is so much needed that we facilitate the matchmaking in between where women are the most and where the women can take more power to decision making, and then couple it to energy efficient solutions all the way around in the ecosystem, around the energy sector. So I really hope to see that in this committee's report on this issue. Thank you.
We all do. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Michel Hueven.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak. As there was no one from my group, I said I would say a few words on this directive on energy efficiency. I would like to thank the rapporteur and the shadow rapporteurs for their work. And although I do not share the sentiment of there being a climate emergency to the extent that my Green colleagues do, I do welcome innovative and business-friendly proposals. This includes that the promise of the Green Deal, which we see are not friendly to consumers and businesses, but we now see concrete solutions to the vulnerable that Ms. Kuhnke aims to protect, so the single moms, the low-income recipients, the elderly, the migrants, and so on. If we take an intersectional approach to this discussion, we can also appreciate that many of the categories of people listed above are also operating in businesses, whether they work in multinational teams or dream of opening a business on their own someday. Our businesses are made up of our citizens and run for our citizens, and creating conditions for businesses being allowed to flourish. And we cannot risk that our policies here exaggerate existing power and gender inequalities. When considering a strategy forward for energy efficiency, we must think of what the effects of the energy transition may have on the vulnerable in our society. To do this, it is best to think of an intersectional approach. What are the costs of doing away with affordable fossil fuels? Is energy produced by renewables accessible to all citizens, including those living in remote regions, the disabled, the unemployed? What are the benefits to women, who are often the keepers of the hearth and home? We are all for energy efficiency and strategies and technologies that will save Europeans both energy and money, and this is the holistic view we have for our citizens. But we have a duty that all those that we represent to decide on policies that will keep all Europeans prosperous and secure. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, dostałem informację, że też
I am told that the European Commission asked for the floor, so I'll give the floor now to the representative of the Energy Efficiency Unit with the European Commission. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, she's online. Claudia Canevari.
Onorevole Canevari, you can press on the speak button.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you and we can see you. Welcome.
Very good. Thank you, and good afternoon, and thank you for allowing the Commission to take the floor. I would like to thank Rapporteur Kuhnke for the draft opinion and indicate that the Commission has carefully examined the proposed amendments. The Commission is committed to ensuring not only a clean, but also a fair, just and inclusive energy transition to achieve the EU's decarbonisation objectives in line with the European Green Deal. In fact, the European Green Deal prioritises the social dimension of the clean energy transition by committing to the principle that no one is left behind. The proposal for a recast energy efficiency directive plays a key role in the Fit for 55 package through, inter alia, first, putting a stronger focus on and giving a solid legal basis to the energy efficiency first principle in policy planning and investment decisions, and second, by strengthening the measures to reap the still substantial energy saving potential across the different sectors of the economy. The importance of energy efficiency has been especially highlighted in the current context of high and volatile energy prices. Energy efficiency investments should be prioritized because energy efficiency helps stabilizing energy prices and mitigating the macroeconomic impacts of periodic shocks in the energy market. The Commission proposal puts a stronger focus on consumer protection and empowerment, especially as regards the most vulnerable customers and group of citizens. Alleviation of energy poverty is a key aspect in this regard, where the proposal for a recast energy efficiency directive introduces an obligation for member states to implement energy efficiency improvements measures as a priority amongst vulnerable households. The aim is to mitigate possible negative distributional effects on vulnerable customers, and the ED recast proposals refers in fact to the concept of vulnerable customers introduced in the Electricity Directive in 2019. The points raised in the draft opinion are important and deserve careful attention. Gender equality is indeed a core principle of the EU, and unfortunately it is not yet a reality. As regards the proposed amendment, asking the Commission to develop specific guidelines on how to ensure that Member States apply gender mainstreaming and gender analysis, it is worth noting that the Commission has often provided guidance documents on important topics, like the ones being debated today, following the adoption of complex pieces of legislation. All vulnerable customer categories referred in the opinion as regards energy poverty are already covered in the EED recast, notably in Articles 8, 10, 21 and 22. The Commission proposal aims at the inclusion, protection and empowerment of all people who are in risk of energy poverty, and we think that naming specific categories of persons to be protected and empowered might bear the risk that the list is not complete, and therefore that persons not listed are excluded, and this would narrow the scope of the provisions. The Fit for 55 package relies on a strong enabling framework, including the Social Climate Fund. Member States will be able to use the fund to finance energy efficiency programs amongst the most vulnerable. If needed, the Commission is ready to clarify further the ED recast proposal on those important aspects and supports the European Parliament to ensure
Thank you very much.
The inclusive and fair transition. Just to say that the Commission is committed to ensure that
we know, always committed. Thank you very much, Commission. Yes, you can send it to us. We will read it as well. Thank you very much for your intervention. And I give back the floor to Alice Kunke for summing up our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, dear colleagues, and thank you, the representative from the Commission, to really giving us support to and inspiration to keep on working with this report. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with this, we conclude the discussion on this topic. The deadline for the amendments is 24th of February at 12 o'clock. With this, we conclude the committee meeting, and we meet each other in less than an hour. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.